Well, I have to say that I was feeling pretty optimistic when I saw they had put me in this room. And then I found out that this is the room where they put all the Microsoft speakers. And I thought, oh, well, there you go. Because this is a topic that I think is very, very relevant, but to only a select few who care. And we'll see what that means. So, session feedback slide, you've seen this probably 100 times already, or at least what we have, 6, 8 sessions yesterday. So please do use it. So I'm going to start this way. Since you are here, I'm wondering if you fall into one of these scenarios. Here's one. That could be you. Could be your teammates. Or this could be you. This was me at one point in my life, I promise. I was working with about 40 folks on my teams, and we spent gobs of money. And the first thing that happened is the consultants walked out, and we said, okay, what do we do about development and test in the same sprint? Well, I don't know. Let's stagger them by a sprint. That works. So we didn't get what we needed from the training, obviously. All right, here's one last one. Okay, I got 2 questions about this one. First, how does the guy know he's wearing a suit? They're texting, but that's irrelevant. Why is he wearing a suit? He's probably interviewing. Anybody have these reorgs come down from on high in your organization wherein everything maybe was clicking along pretty good, and all of a sudden things kind of get pushed into turmoil for a while, chaos? It's not uncommon for that to happen for a little while, but it shouldn't stay that way, right? It shouldn't stagnate in that condition. But we'll see what leaders do maybe to get past that. This is a little bit about me before we get started. I am David, as you can see there. You can connect with me at those places. I was an MVP for a while before coming to Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft now I just got my little 5-year award thing. I do some courses at Pluralsight, and I'll mention actually that there's a course on Pluralsight by the name of this talk. So this isn't a condensed one. This is something I've updated and renewed. But there is more available there if you choose to. And I did have a role at Scrum.org for a while and at GoDaddy for a while. So those are some things that I've done with regard to agility and bringing these things to different organizations. So this is what we're going to talk about in this conversation today, and I'd like that to be a conversation. There are not too many people in this room to ask questions at any point in time that you would like, okay? So just raise your hand, speak out, whatever you'd like to do. And we're going to look at what Scrum says about leadership. We're going to look at how leaders can actually support agility within their organizations and how to sort of deal with the fact, and I'm going to make a case that it's a fact, that we crave certainty as a human species. How do we deal with that fact in the light of agile methods that fly in the face of this? So we'll talk too about high performance teams outside the context of agile a bit, and in the context of high performing teams as defined by various periodicals and journals focusing on things like high-performance athletic teams. What do they have in common with our high-performance software development teams? And then finally, we'll look at just a few tools that you, as a leader in your organization, might be able to take back, or that you might be able to propose to leaders in your organization for tools to help them be effective. So I would assert this, first of all, that there's almost no such thing as agile. We're definitely in a post-agile environment, meaning simply that when you talk about building software in particular, you talk about building it in typically an iterative incremental way, sometimes in a continuous flow model. They're different takes on what Agile means, but one of those is going to be how you approach things, probably. Now, there are high critical systems where that's not necessarily the case, but in the large majority of software development initiatives, this is what we do. And in fact, what we know is, and this is empirical, I'll show you in just a minute. What we know is that most teams trying to use agility, trying to use Agile, I should say, start off by trying to implement Scrum. That's how they do it. And this is some data that kind of backs up Scrum. Now, admittedly, this is data from a survey put out by the Scrum Alliance. So bear that in mind. There's a link down there to it. But what it shows us, and this only comes out every few years, so it's a little stale by a couple of years. But what this shows us is that people are getting value out of using these techniques, particularly Scrum itself. And one thing that I want to draw attention to is this word, customer. So the reason I say this is so important is because in successful organizations, we're no longer looking at value to our stakeholders, right? Bernie Madoff was famous for saying this, right? And we have all this literature now that flies in the face of that philosophy for, in his case, talking about publicly traded companies, says, well, we're going to focus on value to our stakeholders. And that's kind of why we have quarterly reports, right, that come out. And people are looking to see what the value is of the organization to me as a stakeholder. Well, it turns out that if I focus on the customer, that will come as a side effect. And I invite you to learn more about this, but focus relentlessly on our customer is an attribute that we'll see in a couple of other places in this discussion. Okay, so what does Scrum itself say about leadership? Well, I would say, anybody know where to go find the answer to that question? Typically here. So this is a document called the Scrum Guide. When working at scrum.org, was in the position of helping with this thing. And what it is a few pages, 20 or so, that walk you through the rules of Scrum. And the way people like to talk about this is it teaches you the rules of the game, not unlike chess, but it doesn't teach you how to be a good player. It tells you exactly what pieces to move and how what pieces there are and how they move, that sort of thing. So it's a nomenclature document in large part. Has anybody read this? Anyone? Okay. That's all right. I would strongly encourage, I'm supposed to indicate to this one. I would strongly encourage you to, well, you can just see under the Scrum Guide there, it's got scrumguides.org. It's listed in multiple languages. There are versions you can download and you can just browse it online, of course. But what I would say to you is, if you don't know the answer to this, what is leadership according to Scrum, then how can we even have a starting point for conversation? If you're trying to adopt Scrum in your organization or use it effectively. And I would say that about not only you, but your boss and your boss's boss, should there be one. And so, what does Scrum say? Scrum says this. These are the roles that we have in the role of leadership. Self-managing teams means everyone on the team, everyone on the Scrum team. Developers are responsible for product creation through the delivery of increments, right? Increment of software, typically, is what we're here to talk about anyway. Scrum Masters are responsible for leading, establishing, and maintaining Scrum effectively throughout the teams and throughout an organization as a whole. And that's a bigger job than we typically think of a Scrum Master as having. In fact, how many people are on a team where you rotate the role of Scrum Master amongst the members of the team? Anyone? Okay. In that event, it's a very common pattern. In that event, what do you think Scrum would say about that, given the large role and the large set of responsibilities that we give to Scrum Masters? Probably not the most effective idea. And then product owners responsible for leading the product by maximizing product value to the customer. Okay? But, what we haven't mentioned are, gosh darn, there we go, these folks. It turns out these people exist, whether you like it or not. And there are many organizations and many Scrum advocates and consultants that will say, you can build a Scrum-driven organization. Yep, you can. I've seen Scrum applied outside the realms of software development in several cases, and particularly in HR, by the way. Don't know why, but that seems to be a really focal point of using Scrum as a next step, stepping stone outside of the product development teams. However, I would propose to you that these folks exist, and we think of Scrum this way. We think of Scrum as the thing that gets things built, created, done, right? The execution engine of building our product. But I'm going to ask you, what are some other things outside of Scrum that go on in your company? Give me two. Okay, how about budget management? Does that happen? How about setting a vision for the organization, not necessarily at the product level? This is where we're going as a company. Those things happen outside of Scrum? Typically. Maybe you can find a way to organize executives at the level of an Uber Scrum, if you will, or a Scrum of Scrums. That's an old pattern. And I've done that. It can work if the executives are all bought in, but it's a rare case, particularly in larger organizations, like the one I work at today. I work at Microsoft, and things don't actually flow all the way up the chart this way, as you can imagine. But we'll talk about how they do. So here's a set of things that do happen often. In fact, I'd say typically outside the context of Scrum. Now, some of these are controversial because Scrum should be handling it. Like the first one, ensuring coordination across teams. Why isn't Scrum handling that? There's probably a defect in our implementation somewhere when it comes to sprint planning and when it comes to managing our backlogs across the different teams for dependencies. Career mentoring is often a one-on-one conversation with you and your personnel manager, even though Scrum says we don't need one. I have one. It's great. One of the best bosses I've ever worked for. I love to get advice from this person. And we do not do that in the context of Scrum, as you can imagine. We take a virtual walk every week or 2 weeks. So administrative support, business intelligence. Now that can definitely be a part of Scrum in terms of deriving that business intelligence, going out and collecting information from users, potential users, customers, from your instrumented applications, from things like this, but doesn't necessarily need to be. That information can drive what goes into your product backlogs. Okay, good enough. So there are some things that happen outside the context of Scrum in many organizations. So what can we as leaders, or what can our leaders do to support agility in this context? So what are some things that we can do? What do you think the number one thing a leader can do to build an agile organization? Now, if you're not talking to me before, I know you're not going to now, but I'll give you a few seconds anyway. What is the number one thing, in your opinion? I would propose that it's to do this. That it's to make decisions based on evidence. And this is exactly what Scrum prescribes. Thank you. And it is called empiricism. And when you talk about it in the context of Scrum, you'll hear people talk about empiricism. What do they mean? They mean making decisions based on facts. Based on things we can see, in fact, in arrears, because you can't see facts going forward necessarily. You can see things like budget constraints and stuff like that coming in ahead of time, but you can't necessarily see customer feedback coming in ahead of time. So we're making product development decisions based on things that have happened in arrears. And that's the evidence that we have to support what many companies call that execution engine of Scrum that's underlying the implementation. Okay. So if empiricism is a big deal, and it's what we want our leaders to be using to make their decisions, how do we equip them to do this? And some of these things are going to sound kind of old hat, but they're true nonetheless. So first of all, the idea of a data-driven organization is not just to provide product direction, right? It's not. It's to also drive decisions made for monetizing the business model. It's made for supporting incremental approach to product delivery and delivering incrementally all the way to our customers. So it's also, how do we spend our marketing money? When we spent our marketing money, how did it do? I worked at GoDaddy as their director of technical learning and agile implementation for a while, and we'll talk a little bit more about my experience there. But one thing we did famously is spend money on Super Bowl ads. Some were sort of tasteful, some weren't, if you'll recall. And the last one they did, I'll never forget it. We're all watching this commercial fly across the screen, and we thought, what? That's our commercial? And we looked at the data from hits to the site, basically. What were we looking for? We were looking for hits to the site, DNS searches, and an uptick in our Wix competitor, Build Your Own Website. That's what we were looking for. We saw the smallest uptick they'd ever seen on a Super Bowl ad. And they don't run Super Bowl ads now. At least they weren't the last time I looked. And that's been 2 or 3 years ago. And that is making a data-driven decision. Something that's been a custom for years in that company. They chopped it off. And I propose the reason they did that is because they changed CEOs. They had a different CEO on top of that particular year that looked at that data. We knew he was a data-driven individual. And, well, that's awesome. I hadn't even done that. So there we go. We're talking about a data-driven organization. Sorry. So that's my hypothesis on why they so willingly cut that tradition from the company, because they're now dealing with a data-driven individual who's making empirical decisions. And that's an example of this. Feedback driving the direction of the business. In this case, it was marketing. In some cases, I have seen working with partners here at Microsoft, we get to work with a wonderful set of independent software vendors who make software solutions. And I'll tell you that I currently work in the Azure Marketplace and the Microsoft Commercial Marketplace, places where people go to spend money with our partners' solutions. And I have seen partners come to our marketplace and say, wow, this is an opportunity for a different way of doing business. And they'll get their software offered up through the marketplace. And what that means is I can spend differently on sales, I can spend less on procurement, and I can spend far less on operations. So I get to move some of my money around in my company, or I get to, in fact, save it. So it changes our business models in many cases. And finally, I'll say that we've got this old term now, digital transformation, but we talk about it a lot with our partners, and it's needed in support of these data-driven decisions that we can make and to get the feedback we need to derive that data. So we need to do things like this. We need to instrument our products, meaning that we need to put signals into our products that phone home and tell us whether or not a particular feature is popular, used, ignored, what have you, and have the courage to remove it when it's not a popular feature. That's one thing. We need to be running our machine learning not just on the data that we collect from our customers, but that which we generate internally as well, so that we can measure success not only of our products, but we can measure things like how do we improve our execution, our teams, and our decision making. So there you go. Digital transformation actually can consist of a couple of things. One thing I've mentioned is instrumenting your products, but in addition to that, I talked a little bit about the instrumentation of your organization's business. And when I say that, the first thing that pops to mind for me, there's a lot of options there, but the first thing that pops to mind for me is this: DevOps. If you're not using DevOps, this is a problem. If you are using DevOps, that's wonderful. Are you harvesting data from your DevOps processes and your automatic builds, your automatic tests, all that good stuff, your time to release, your time even to build, frankly. But time to release is a big one. That could be releasing to a staging environment because you know contractually you're not able to push live for your product for more than once a quarter. Could be, that's fine. But time to release to that environment. How many people do you get on your manual testing environment before you push out? There are a lot of things that we can measure in DevOps, and those things will help drive the rhythm of our business too, because as we increase quality, we will get faster, and as we get faster, the opportunities for our business folks grow. They get more options on how they deliver to customers and the deals they can strike with customers. And our sales folks can talk to customers differently because they can come to you've probably had this experience. A salesperson will come in and say, this partner, this customer wants a given feature. Sorry, man, we're way behind schedule. And not only that, but that's a really difficult thing to do. Here's the timeline. We've done some projections. It's going to take a long time. Well, that may be true, but the cost of doing that may be greater than the cost of not doing it. In other words, you may make more money from doing this one thing than the 30 things that you've currently got on your backlog. That's not a decision for the team to make, but it's one that the business can make. And they can only make it if they understand the velocity of change of the product. And it becomes the responsibility, once we have these things in hand, once we have this data in hand, to kind of go through this decision loop. And there are a lot of models for decision loops out there, my favorite being OODA, which was something a fighter pilot named John Boyd coined for how fighter pilots make a decision: observe, orient, decide, and act. And they do that in such a quick way that they're able to dodge a stream of fire, or they're able to attack on a vector, something like that. But here is a reasonable one: measure, analyze, decide, and act. So I'm going to measure what I can. If I can't measure it, put something in place such that I can. I'm going to put that through a considered and thoughtful analysis. This is almost the job, the analysis stage of a product owner. Right? They're going to look at this stuff and determine, oh boy, what should we be doing next? And then finally, we decide on that, and you may have to sell this up the tree as a product owner. That's okay, because now you've got the evidence backing your decision or your proposal. And finally, we as a team get to act on that. And we get to act on that with customers, internal stakeholders, and with leaders of our organization like a board of directors. And I've seen this happen personally, that the company had done this, measure, analyze, decide, and wanted to act in such a large way as to pivot the business to the point where they needed to go to the board of directors and say, look, we think we see a new business opportunity over here. We don't have enough people to staff what we've been doing. We would like to pivot direction. And they had the data to back that up. All right. We talked a little bit about DevOps practices, and DevOps practices lower the risk of defects. And they enable, oh, there we go. Weird. I'm seeing something different on my screen. And they enable this idea. Supporting failure to learn is a very difficult thing outside this room. You know, if you came to this talk, you've probably heard about this before. No big deal. Let's learn by failing often and failing fast. Well, you say that to somebody in an executive position, and it sounds kind of nuts in many understandings or interpretations of that. So we have to stop and talk about what that really means. Let's actually try something, see that it doesn't work, pull it back and try it again. Pull it back and try it again. I can't do that too many times before I start losing credibility, however. So what do we do to avoid having to pull back and go with another and another option? We build a data-driven organization that gives us all of the telemetry that we need to make these sorts of decisions, that we need to make to determine what to do next in a very thoughtful and considered way, instead of just trying what we think our customers want. We can try to expand on features that our customers are currently using, and again, have the bravery to cut out the ones that they're not. Now, I will admit in that scenario, cutting out the ones that we want, sometimes we have a really big customer, and they're the only ones that use that feature. So be it. They get it. But that's a data-driven decision too. There's a lot of revenue connected to that button, right? So this is a hard thing for people to support. And we have to teach them. It's our job to teach them what this phrase really means, right? It's about experimentation. It's about the scientific method almost. That's the way I like to think about it. The scientific method prescribes that we try something with the hypothesis behind it, see if it fails or succeeds. And if it fails, we come back with another hypothesis. If it succeeds, we try it again to make sure it succeeds again, by the way, and then have others try it. But this very much reminds me of that model. And I want to tell you a little story about providing focus, because this is one of the things that an agile executive can do that will change an organization permanently. And that is to provide focus. How much time, you don't have to tell me, but just think about how much time you spend in email and meetings that are not directly contributing to the delivery of value to the customer in your organization. How much time do you spend doing that stuff? Too much. Too much. Me too, man. By a long shot, in fact. And they're recording this. That's great. Not really, Patrick. I'm serious. So, yeah. Well, it turns out that I had another boss second favorite boss ever. No, this was a genuine example of leadership that I want to share with you. And for those of you who may not have seen these before, those are newspapers. And they used to get delivered to your house. So big sack of newspapers. And why is that relevant? Because we were working on a deadline. I was working on a deadline. And frankly, at that point in the organization's evolution, I was one of 2 developers committed to this particular thing, but it happened to be one of the biggest potential money makers for the organization. But it was too late to throw more developers at it. And my boss knew that. I worked in this really cool place in terms of facilities. And one of the things that they had was they had glass doors on everyone's office. Everybody got an office and you got glass doors on your office. People could walk by, they could see you in there. You could see if you were busy, tap, tap, hey, you got a minute? That sort of thing. It was meant to increase collaboration. What it increased was interruption time. And there was an actual policy that you could not put papers, you couldn't tape paper onto the glass door because they wanted to make sure that people could see you were in your office. And so my boss went out, got a newspaper, and taped up my entire door and the door of my colleague who I was working with across the hallway, the 2 of us. They just papered our door. Within 15 minutes, I think he got a visit from the CEO. The CEO. Now, it wasn't a huge company, about 300 people at the time. But still, the CEO came down and said, you can't do this. What are you doing? I don't know the conversation that ensued, but we kept our newspaper. And my interruption times went down unbelievably for the next however long it took to deliver and ship that product. It was probably a week or 2. But it was one of those things where we were burning midnight oil and stuff, and we got it out the door. We wouldn't have done it without those newspapers. It was incredible. So going to the mat for us in that context, I think, is an incredibly positive example of leadership in an environment like ours. I don't know what your environment looks like today. It's probably more of an open plan. That's where most of us tend to work these days, or you're working at home like I do. In which case, interruptions are your choice, by the way. It's your choice to be interrupted. But I won't belabor that because most people disagree. You can always turn Teams off. By the way, I was thinking about Teams earlier because it looks like I've put 3 people in together mode out there. Just a thought. Okay, so we can move on now to this. There is an absolute human desire for certainty about what's coming next, about our lives, about where we're going to get our next meal, where we're going to sleep tonight, and oh, by the way, about when we're going to ship and for how much and how many people is it going to take. An absolute desire for that. What's this? Somebody knows what this is. What is it? Cone of uncertainty. Okay, so this is a pretty simple model. And it tells us that at the beginning of a given, let's call it a project, our estimates, our understanding of what it's going to take to build this thing can be up to 4 times wrong. And logically, the further we proceed down this cone, the more accurate our estimates get, because the closer you get to finish, obviously, the closer you're going to be able to say with exactitude what is about to happen. Now, the cone of uncertainty was developed to model requirements and estimation understanding in long-term projects. That was its original conception. This, however, is what the cone of uncertainty looks like in Scrum. Still there. You're still coming out of sprint planning with some uncertainty about what it is you're going to do next. No question about that. but your ability to project and forecast accurately comes much faster. So let's say you're working in one month sprints. I happen to be running an effort right now that's running in 1 month sprints. And so at the beginning of that, in sprint planning, we pull a certain amount of work. And teams have this really interesting characteristic. Some teams are always optimistic. Some teams are always pessimistic when it comes to how much work they feel they can pull in a sprint planning meeting. So I'm an optimist. I admit that. Recovering optimist, meaning that I pull too much work to actually get done in a sprint. And so within a short time, I'm able to say, yeah, I'm not actually going to make this. And not only that, I get reminded at next sprint planning that you keep doing that, pull less stuff. But that cone of uncertainty exists even in iterative incremental models of product delivery. This is what a typical model looks like, wherein we engage with a customer. We have a lot of conversations up front about what do you want, what do you want, what do you want? Tell us more, tell us more. We write it all down, and then we start working, and then we have a touch point at some point later, or 2 or 3, throughout the course of the project or product build. And then we get to the end, and we show it again, and they say, oh, that's not what we want. It's not right. Oh, well, what do you want? Oh, well, this. And so we have this big flurry at the end of activity and checkpoints at the end where we get it to actually meet what we wanted it, what the client and customer wanted it to be. Anyone experience this? It's funny because I see just a couple of you guys over in this area laughing every once in a while. That makes me feel good. So, anyway, what does this model look like in Scrum? As I'm sure you can guess, it looks like that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're getting perfectly certain about what we're making just because we're getting these frequent feedback sessions with our customer, but it means that even though certainty is low to where we're going, perceived certainty is also low, and this becomes something that we can work with. Perceived certainty is low. That's weird. But if we can get our leaders to accept that perceived certainty is low, we can make very different business decisions. And here's what I mean by that. Here's a plan to get from point A to B, okay? And there we have our execution model that kind of flies all over the place because we've changed directions several times in terms of what does our customer want. And it's okay. Not only is it okay, but it brings more value to our customer and therefore our business. Anybody in a consulting company? You might work consulting? A couple, okay. So, Agile contract for consulting. Do you guys have one that you standardly use? We try. Okay, so here's one. We'll take all your requirements that you have at the very beginning of a project, and I'm going to analyze those, and I'm going to write them down. That's going to cost you. That's business analysis in its truest form. So we're going to create a backlog for you. Great. Once we have this backlog, we'll start executing on it at your request. However, before we do so, know these rules. You get the opportunity at any time to change any order or, in fact, replace anything in that backlog so long as execution on it has not yet begun. So as long as we're not working on it, you can change it out. As long as the business analyzed value of that backlog doesn't change. So in other words, you put something in, you got to take something out. Okay, so we do this for a while. Oh, and the biggest rule of all is you can quit at any time. And we must have your attendance at a very regular demonstration of what we're building for you. You got to be there. You got to come to sprint review. That's all there is to it. And call it a demo. I don't care what you call it. It's at that point where you're going to deliver an increment and your customer has to at least talk with you that often. Okay, so they do that. And the part about you can quit any time comes when they see that, oh, we have enough functionality in this product that we no longer have to continue executing on the backlog. Now, what do I as a consulting firm get? I can look at the history of our work on this product. I can take the backlog that we've already executed, take the value of that, project it over the remaining backlog, and our deal was, in our initial rule with you, was that you'll pay us 50% of that cost or value. So in other words, you'll give us 50% of the remaining work as a lump sum. And actually it works out great for everyone. Is that similar to what you try and do?
It is similar to what we attempt to do, but not always the mindset customers come in.
Customers don't like it?
They don't like the idea that we don't want to commit confidently to what we can deliver, which is usually the whole thing.
I see. Okay. So
I don't deliver code. I'm an Agile coach. So I'm usually trying to help them understand the Agile piece of it so that my team can come in and deliver the way you're describing.
Okay. That's a very interesting problem. So she's describing a problem where the customer doesn't buy it and says, I don't want all of that rigmarole that you're talking about. I don't want to have to deal with all that. I just want you to start at point A and get to point B and give me what I said I wanted. At some point, you have to determine as a business who your best customers are. Because in fact, working to this Agile contract model will make you more money. It will make you more money. And it's because of that point where they're able to see, okay, we're done. And once they see that, you get paid. Do you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree.
Cool.
Unfortunately, I'm not the salesperson.
I understand. I totally get it. Been there, man. All right. You bet, please.
Do you say you can quit at any time, and if you quit, you pay us 50% of the value of the backlog you have executed on?
That we have not executed on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Alrighty. So what we've been talking about here is simply this. This is a very, standard statement. We've all probably heard this. Use Scrum to incrementally change direction to meet customer need. Paraphrasing everything. The reason I have this on the screen, it will be evident in a second. That's my LinkedIn profile, li.elegantcode.com. You can go there and it'll get you there. Now, the reason I put it up there is because this is something that I posted just 2 days ago, so it actually is still relevant. And it's still somewhat near the top of my feed. And I don't expect you to read all of the small text here. What this is saying is simply that what I asserted in the beginning, the, Psychiatric Science Journal came out with this article that says, in effect, human beings do not value small incremental changes to anything. We value and appreciate large big bang changes to things. And it's, for the most part, if you read the article, because we can recognize them easier. We can see them more clearly. Yet that flies in the face of what most Agile methods prescribe, certainly Scrum. So, what do we do? People don't like small change. Small changes are not impressive. Only big change events are seen as valuable. And so, standing fast with your executives in your organization over small incremental and iterative delivery cycles is a very difficult thing to pull off. You have to teach them. You have to help them understand. Why? This model here is better because this model goes against our nature and we don't want to do it. And we just heard that a moment ago. Our customers want to go point A to point B. We're typically not going to do that even in a project that's supposed to go to point A to point B, right? The only difference is in this case, you've got change request forms. So I would encourage you to go out there and have a look at this. I'm sorry I don't have a short link to it. I should have put a short link on here. But it's a pretty fascinating little paper. And it really smacked me in the face because I never realized how primordial this is. You know, I know how stubborn people are. I've witnessed that for many, many years, but I never understood why. Here's the why. It's through empirical study, which is pretty cool. Any questions or thoughts before I move on to what's next here? You bet.
Maybe a bit of a devil's advocate question. If we have this predisposition toward big changes, are we going against the grain? Like, what can we point to and say incremental value? Like, this is a better path.
Yeah, I get it. Well, what I would propose is that the best way to make that case to the people you're trying to influence up in an organization, you're trying to influence up typically if you're in this talk, is through case study. And there are millions of them, right? There are case studies everywhere. They first, though, need to understand what you're proposing. So if you can in any way pull off getting them to read at least some of or skim the Scrum Guide, that would be cool. Say, look, I want to have this conversation with you, but in order to do so, we kind of need a baseline. And this little paper here will give us a baseline if you wouldn't mind having a look at it. Okay, great. So we got that. And now that we understand roles, responsibilities, and artifacts of the game, now let's talk about why we would want to do this. Why would we want to do this? And, you know, there are company names that spring to mind for me, but I'll let you discover them for yourself. You can go out to Scrum Alliance or scrum.org and find plenty of case studies, many of which I'm sure will fit your particular business because they're in different industry. Even things as rigid as financial services. So it's good stuff. All right. Thank you for that. Let's talk quickly about high performance teams. We mentioned that we were going to discuss this. So this is the definition of high performance teams according to Harvard Business Harvard Business School Press, very different periodical, article called The Wisdom of Teams. Okay, so high performance teams outperform other similar teams and they outperform expectations given their composition. So in other words, I have two teams with similar compositions in terms of maybe skill sets, of people's aptitudes, etc. I put them in place and I watch one team dramatically outperform the other. Why would that happen? It happens, by the way. We can probably all think about times in our careers at a somewhat larger organization, medium to large size, where you've seen that exact thing. And at least I know I have. So what do good leaders do to build high performance teams? First of all, they inspire more than drive. If I ever hear the term, you're driving to success, I see it in job ads all the time at unnamed organizations that I work for, where there is a line in there driving success of the product, driving whatever the case may be, to a good outcome. And then that just brings to mind to me this picture of somebody snapping a whip behind a group of people that they're trying to get to go in one direction. I don't get it. Inspiration is, come with me. Let's go this way. We're headed in this direction. It's a very different way of bringing people along with you. It's bringing people along instead of driving them in front of you. And more pull than push, which if you're familiar with Kanban and pull systems and systems thinking, pull over push is a big deal. So this can happen all the way at the executive level, inspire more than drive. So resolving conflicts means that we don't let problems fester, right? We don't let them stick around too long. We resolve them quickly as soon as they're identified. This can even be conflicts within personality types on a team. It can be conflicts between different organizations, or I'll call it different departments within an organization. We want to build this. We want to build this. We can't build both. What are we going to focus on? Got to step in and resolve that quickly. And we'll get to some ways to do that. Good leaders who are trying to inspire do this. They set stretch goals. That one sounds kind of iffy, I bet. Well, it depends on how you define a stretch goal. If a stretch goal is you have to do all your work owing this too, then that's not what we're talking about. I saw a thing the other day, probably a meme, I don't know, that said, oh, you're doing such a great job, we'd like you to take over the user design department too. Any raise? No, but great credibility and responsibility. So that's not what we're talking about in terms of stretch goals. It turns out that people and teams want to do extraordinary things, extraordinary things. And supportive team leaders will challenge the team as a whole to do so. And they do that because doing something extraordinary feels extraordinary, going beyond the bounds and limits of what you thought you could do. Remember the initial definition of a high-performance team outperforms based on its composition, right? Same group of people. Now we give them a reason, a vision, a little bit of a stretch. They'll want to do it. And it doesn't need to conflict with what they are already tasked to do. In fact, you can give them capacity to do so. This one is pretty standard. If I'm not a broken record on it, your executive should be. And that is to simply say, this is what we stand for, and this is where we're going. Say it a lot, say it often, and this is the last one that I'll mention about what leaders need to do to build these high-performance teams. This is not something you can buy. This is something you get when you cover my office door in newspaper, right? This is something you get trust from your team when you, as a leader, do something extraordinary. Just a thought. Building trust. There's a little formula to that, like it or not. We trust people that we like. We trust demonstrated expertise. And we trust consistency. Walk the walk. We trust those three things. Every leader needs to do those three things. We need to be personable. Can't be a downer. You got to inspire. We trust people we like. We have to be experts in our own field. It's not to say the expert in the field of the person working for you. It's not the case. I don't care what Elon Musk said. And finally, walk the walk. Do what you said you were going to do. It's the definition of integrity. All right, now hiring. About this, I'll simply say that this is a big deal. You don't hire people that aren't going to be a great fit for the team in ways all across the board. You're not just looking for technical expertise and depth. You are looking for that, but that's not all you're looking for. You're looking for whether they are a cultural fit to your team. Are they going to feel comfortable collaborating with other people on the team rather than competing with them? Right? And you can tell that in an interview. One thing that's really frustrating, by the way, is that it seems that to me, people who are in the position of doing the hiring are never in as big a hurry as those people who want to be hired, right? Because you got things going on and you're really busy. So this hiring this position that's open is only one of the things that you're responsible for. As soon as you find a really good person that you think is going to be a hit, move on it right away. I learned that lesson the hard way by not moving for 2 days. In 2 days, I lost a candidate I really wanted. And then it took another 6 weeks to find the right one. So that said, we're hiring for culture. We're hiring for fit across the team in terms of collaboration. And we don't just hire anyone that has the depth we're looking for. But speaking of the depth we're looking for, has anybody heard of T-shaped developers? T-shaped developers are folks who might have some degree of knowledge and skill around, let's say in this case, security and HTML, but really they're a SQL expert, right? And we hire them in terms of their technical expertise, probably because they're a SQL expert, but oh, you know what? You've got security and you've got, HTML. I don't know, developers breathe that. It probably shouldn't have been my example. But you've got these things. They augment the team. We want that too. So you're hired. Now what? Now we want you to expand your scope a little bit into some other realm. And it's not to say you have to be an expert about this, but our product happens to be written in React. It happens to be written in, I don't know, some framework I don't like. Other frameworks. And along the way, because you are an expert in SQL, we're going to ask you to also dive into NoSQL, because that is where we're going to migrate from where we sit on RDBMS SQL today. We're going to do that. And so we're going to ask you to become a deep expert in that. And along the way, that's probably going to grow your JavaScript skills. Now I say pie-ish because right now we're looking at a pie-shaped developer, but ultimately we're going to get, more and more of these types of skills on board. That's not to say you have to be deep in everything, but you got to be deep in a few things. 1 or 2 even is often enough. This is an old adage. Let's see if you have seen this before. Okay. So in order to keep them, after you've trained them, we got to do a few things. One is we have to invest in things like letting the team build the automation they're asking you permission to build, DevOps. Ensure the team has access to quality additional learning resources. It doesn't have to be an in-person class anymore, obviously. I've been learning a lot about my job domain off various online sites lately. I won't name any. One thing our team does that I love, and so does the rest of our organization, this is an org of about 300 people, is that we have Learning Day once a month. So once a month, we take an entire day and nobody tells you what to go learn. You just do. You have that day and it's blocked off by our general manager. And you're not supposed to take meetings that day. If you have to take meetings that day, the policy is, okay, you can do so, but you need to block another day on your calendar next week so that you can have your own learning day. Now, I recently made the suggestion to my manager that it would be great if you and I could talk about what I needed to learn to support my job better. And that conversation hasn't been going on necessarily. We've just kind of been ad hoc learning what we need to do our jobs, which is fine because people do research the things that they need to know. There's integrity there. But it would also be great to have a conversation with someone about, I'd like my career to move in this direction. Where could I go spend some of my learning day to get that done? Beyond the tactical, how do I deal with a given technology? Just a thought. That's something we do on our team. We do Hackfests, and we love those things. Finally, that infrastructure stuff. This is everything from DevOps to cloud to developer workstations. It costs money, spend the money. Because guess what? The training cost money too, didn't it? You don't want to lose the investment you've made. So the CEO, in this case, I would propose has it right. High performance teams also, and lastly, do this. They have inspections of themselves often. Rather than huddling up about the work necessarily, they'll also huddle up about how we're doing. How's our process doing? How are we sitting with our team norms, right? Their culture, if you will. Self-assessment is planned and improved and is vital. And as you likely know, this is the role of the Scrum retrospective. Once you have a high performance team, once you've made these investments, you've inspired this group of individuals, and you can see that even though they have similar compositions to others, they're outperforming their team, colleagues, I'll say. What do you do with them? What do you do with that team? And what I'll say is it's not enough as a leader to have one, to have them. Right? I can have an organization of high performance teams. Great. But what do I do with them? So it turns out that now it's time for you as a leader to do your job, and you need to use these teams to deliver well. Because here's the secret sauce. Be very thoughtful about what you ask a team like this to do, because they'll do it. And they'll do it really, really well. And if it's not the right thing, if it's not something driven by empiricism that you want, that your customer needs, they're going to do it anyway because that's what you told them to do. Here are a couple of other ways to help teams get there. And this is the last section of our conversation. So, what are some tools that you can have in your toolbox as an Agile leader? What are some tools that you can provide to others who might be trying to lead either a transformation or a sustaining of Agile across an organization? Remember in the beginning, we saw a slide of that one person who was in a suit, and they had a great Agile environment working with DevOps, automation, all this good stuff, and a reorg happened, and things are going off the rails. Sustaining agility within your organization is something that you have to do. It's not something that just happens. Okay, that said, this is where Agile coaches are going to freak out on me. And I only said that because you said you're an Agile coach. But I want to explain before I get into this that self-assessment is a big deal here. I'm not talking about somebody sitting down and going through a checklist of, did you go to stand up today? Chuck, and going through a process like that. I'm talking about here a model that I have used very, very successfully to help teams reach higher and higher levels of performance. And that starts with the team evaluating themselves, not the team being evaluated by others. It is, however, necessary in this world to facilitate that conversation from somebody who knows what they're talking about. So how are we doing with our Agile practices? We're doing fine. An Agile coach might say, have you considered, right? That might be a lead-in to a change suggestion. So just like in a very simple method like planning poker, which I'm sure most of us know, we have used voting to keep the answers honest. I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like in just a minute, but what it comes down to is instead of just sitting there having an ad hoc conversation, we can ask the question, how effective do we think our blank practice is? Everybody comes to a conclusion. They vote on that in some way. We used a little website that let you vote, and then boom, turns over the cards, and the interns tell you how messed up you are, and they're right, or something. So lastly, this creates, if you use it in this way, a heat map for improvement for your organization, for your team. And I'll give you a very brief example of this, Agile and Scrum practices self-assessment. In this case, what is shown as, just pick a practice, it doesn't matter. Let's look at the right-hand side. We've got a no score, silver, gold, platinum. Okay? Silly little way to gamify this. But what it says, in some cases, we might have use commonly known design patterns. This is probably the first thing your team can do as an engineering organization to get on the same page, by the way, even before test-driven development or test-driven practices. Speak the same language of patterns. Are we doing that? Well, we're doing it a little bit. Silver. We're not doing it at all. No score. We're doing it, and we're doing it very successfully. That team might assess itself in that way, gold. And if they're doing it so well that they could teach it to other teams, take advantage of that. That's a platinum team. And they could hold brown bags, or they could hold training sessions on how to distribute design patterns across the rest of the organization and the other teams. Okay, now we're going to take a look at what this kind of looks like when we sort it out. Here's a team. They've assessed themselves with a couple of scores. They go through the process. We develop a heat map of those things. Now we can order according to that heat map. And now we have something that we can come to as a coach, as a facilitator. I can work with this team who has self-assessed that this is their state, and we can deliberately create a backlog for improvement. We can put that into our sprint retrospectives, and we can work on this incrementally over time. And we self-assess every 6 months. And this was the results of that. 1,200 engineers used this model. Different questions, I'll be honest. I didn't want to reflect the same ones. 1,200 engineers we introduced this model to with a team of about 7 coaches. And this is what happened. We started delivering every 2 weeks across all of the organization. It was amazing. And people started to take pride in their ability to execute these practices well. So, team self-assessment, there's a tool that hopefully you can take home. Here's one that's a much bigger thing. It's going to require some research if you've not looked into it. If you have looked into it, you might think I'm crazy to say what I'm about to say. Objectives and key results. Who's familiar with this? Anyone? A couple of folks. All right, great. So it is, I'll just say what it says here, technique for setting goals and measuring achievement of those goals. It sounds simple, right? It sounds like no big deal. Where it comes from, you can learn about in this TED Talk that I've linked to here by a gentleman named John Doerr, who's actually credited as coming up with this system, which is derivative of a management by objective, actually. And he's sort of known as the person who came up with that. But in fact, his boss, at the time that he conceived it, was Andy Grove, who said this. It almost doesn't matter what you know. Execution matters most. We've probably heard this before, particularly in terms of entrepreneurship. Your idea is worthless unless you make it. Okay, so this is what they are. The what are objectives, and the how are the key results. This is how we look at it. This starts at the executive level, and we can set an objective. To a department level entity in your org that will come back with a set of key results that are measurable, time-bound, and have other characteristics that we'll look at that are the results of those achieving those objectives. And we can go to the team and even to, in some cases, the individual level, although that's not necessarily recommended. Team level stuff is good. All right. Attributes of Great OKRs. Outcome oriented. What are we trying to achieve? How do we know we've achieved it? Customer value and quality, time, cost, et cetera. And they need to be balanced across various dimensions. Aimed at creating the best possible outcome. Does this thing that we're about to do really make a difference? And finally, owned and maintained or owned by the team, create products that move toward OKRs, that support OKRs as a team because we work together, not in silos. And here's an executive level example. Create happy customers. What are my key results going to be? An NPS score, increase users by 12%, increase revenue by 18%. That's at an executive level. This trickles all the way down to a Scrum team level. Where we have two objectives coming from our departmental level: deliver high quality scalable solutions. We are the product and code experts. We are the product and code experts. Let's pay attention to this one. This is good. So key results include sub 500 millisecond response times, 100% uptime, bug turnaround time. Now we're the code experts, participate in that hackathon, have a learning day. New features are user tested. So this comes down to many of our practices on the team. And maybe hire one team member. And the last thing I'll say about OKRs, because we are running out of time a bit, is this. This is not a prescription. This is something I've seen done and work. And that is, this is how you decompose all the way from objectives and key results down to your backlog. And I'll let you look at that in the deck that you received as part of this talk. So what I want you to remember most is between command and control, there's always an option, right? Really? Nothing? Oh, there we go. It's a dad joke, right? Right in the middle of the talk. I thought it was good. All right. Between command and control, there's always an option. We went through our backlog, which now looks like this. And finally, I'll throw this last slide up there. So, and it's a bigger me now for some reason. I don't know why. Connect with me on social. That'd be great. There's a link to the full course of this session, should you choose to have a look at that. And finally, please do provide your feedback on the app. Appreciate it. Thank you.